Tommy is a former Deputy Scottish Secretary, former Labour Councillor, manager of the Stand Comedy Club, which is why I leave the humour to him, and an ardent independence activist. So thank you very much, Tommy Sheppard.
I'm going to stand up if you don't mind, because my back's a bit sore and it's easier to do. Yes, and I guess all of us have come on a journey to where we are today in the Yes campaign. I certainly, even 5 years ago, wouldn't have been taking the position I do now. Certainly 20 years ago, when I worked for the Labour Party as a full-time official, it was my job to campaign against the SNP and against the prospect of independence. Although I have to say, looking back, it was never really properly discussed as a serious option, to be honest. I don't think we ever have done that until these last few months. But I am now firmly of the mind, not because I've changed, because I still believe in the things now that I believed in 10 years ago and 20 years ago. I believe in, I believe in equality, I believe in social justice, I believe that it's the role of government to intervene in capitalism, to try and control it in some way, to temper the economy so that it benefits most of the people, and to pursue social justice at home and peace and cooperation internationally. Those are the tenets of social democracy that I've been brought up with, that I've embraced as part of my DNA. And it's because I believe in those things and because I can no longer see the prospect of achieving them through the United Kingdom that I've come to support a yes position. And it seems to me that the proposition that the people who live in Scotland should be the ones who control its future, that is not to me inherently a nationalist proposition. That's a straightforward democratic suggestion, that the people who live in a place should be the ones who control it. I mean, who else ought to control it, for heaven's sake? So it seems to me that, and of course there is increasingly support for that position, and it comes not just from nationalists, but from many people who are not nationalists. And as Pat said, and I actually looked at the Scottish Labour website today, and I mean, it's appalling really, but it's so glib and facile. It constantly refers to nationalists and the SNP and Alex Salmond. Never once mentions the Yes campaign. Never once mentions that there's actually a serious debate going on with other people engaged in it. And I think that'll probably be the leadership of the Labour Party's downfall at the end of the day, to be honest. Because a lot more people are getting involved in this campaign. At its height in 2011, the SNP got 31% of the vote in Scotland. 31%. And within that 31%, there would have been people who voted for the SNP to try and stop the other guy. I know people who voted SNP because they're Tories and wanted to stop the Labour candidate, and I'm sure it works the other way around. So let's assume that the core support for the SNP, for the Nationalist Party, if we believe that's what it is under 30%. So to get to 50%, you'd have to build a much bigger campaign than just people who regard themselves as nationalists. Luckily, that is exactly what the Yes campaign is doing, and is well on the way to succeeding with. And there are many people who regard themselves as Greens, as Socialists, just as Democrats, or in fact as nothing at all, as not aligned to any political philosophy at the moment, who are joining the organisation. And this is about the third meeting I've spoken at with not a single SNP person on the platform, to be honest. And it's just indicative of the range of support that's growing. And of course the mushrooming of organisations all over the place, sort of Mothers for Indy and everybody for Indy, right? I think it's fantastic. It really is, as Pat said, a tremendous grassroots organisation. And I believe that we can win this vote. But of course, the alternative, which includes the Labour Party leadership, are determined to try and smear this campaign as just being about nationalism. And that's the first retort whenever you get talking to people, it's all about separatism and nationalism and putting up borders and all the rest of it. I mean, what world do these people live in, right? I mean, maybe they believe that Scotland isn't a country and that there isn't a border with England already. I don't know, perhaps some of them do. But assuming they don't believe that, then it's glib in the extreme to try and develop that as a caricature of the position and say that we are in favour of some sort of separate, Scotland with borders all around it and not having anything else to do with the world. I mean, the truth is that any country in this world has to be interdependent. It has to work with other nations to achieve things that it cannot achieve alone. Perhaps only North Korea would be an example of the opposite situation, where they try and genuinely have no communication with anybody outside their borders. But for us, and for an independent Scotland, it is vital that we have good relationships with the rest of the people that live in Britain, that we have good, strong relationships with other countries in Europe, and that we play our role in the world. In order to do any of those things, we first of all have to have our own government with the normal powers and controls that you would expect a government to have. And that's why I'm voting yes, not because I'm a nationalist, but because I am an internationalist. And I want to see Scotland play a much better role in the world, and I want to see us take action about things that are wrong here in Scotland. And that's the other thing. I mean, I suppose the other reason why I'm voting yes is that I'm mad as hell. I mean, I've 40 years I've been involved in politics. 40 years I've been trying to argue these things, and 40 years I've watched things go backwards. And I still believe in the same things I believed in then, and I see people whizzing past me and changing their position. But the country, as Pat says, gets more unequal. Things get worse, not better. There comes a time, they say it's a sign of intelligence in a living organism, that you can learn from mistakes. That you try something, and if it doesn't work, you try it again. And after so many times of trying it and it not working, you then decide, well, I've got to try something else. And that's pretty much the way I feel about the current situation we are in. And put simply, the prospects of achieving the type of society I want to see are much better in a country of 5.5 million people, where the majority of people are already predisposed to that vision, than being a small part of a much larger country where the majority of people probably are hostile to that vision. We won't achieve everything here. This is not a socialism in one country project, but we can make a start. We can make a start in changing things in Scotland and trying to address the manifest inequality that there is. And there's two things I think independence would do. One, it would protect the things that we've managed to develop so far, and there are many things that have happened throughout Britain that are to be valued. The greatest of which is probably the National Health Service, which is probably the best embodiment of human cooperation in practice that anyone could point to anywhere in the world. But the National Health Service has been protected in Scotland. So has our education. We have free medicine. We have free education here. But we don't borrow time with these things. They're not going to last forever, because if we vote no and the real austerity measures come through in 16 and 17, two things will happen. One, the amount of money generally will be squeezed in the public sector, but also because of the privatisation south of the border, the calculations will be redrawn so that we get a smaller share of the UK purse anyway. And there will be a double whammy for the public sector in Scotland if we vote no on September the 18th. But as well as protecting the gains we've got, we also have to go further. We have to make changes that we haven't yet made, and that's why we need to have the normal powers of government. And I'll give you an example of childcare, for example, because that was one of the things that came up in the white paper. And the Better Together campaign said, oh, what's the SNP want to claim you have to have independence and spend more money on childcare? They can do that now if they want, right? And again, this incredible glibness. Yes, of course, they could do it now. But if you spend money on childcare in order to get more women into the labour market so that they can pay more taxes, and those taxes go to George Osborne, who won't give it back to you to fund the childcare in the first place, what's the point? You just run out of money. The whole idea of having an independent government with economic powers to influence the economy is that you can control both sides of that equation. As well as spending money and providing things, you can also raise money. You can get the contributions in, and through doing that, you can change the world. I'm going on a bit, but the other thing is, I'm concerned about and again, this is my concern about the Labour leadership. Because here's another thing they say against this proposition. They say that, all you're doing is, this would be a betrayal of the people of England, right? Betrayal of the working class communities in England, right? I remember a senior member of Parliament in the Labour Party telling me that, we had more in common with the working class people of Liverpool than we did with the Duke of Buccleuch, which is quite ironic now when we consider that the Duke of Buccleuch was one of the people that's funding the No campaign. but of course that's true. Yes, we do. We have more in common with working class people in Liverpool, in Manchester, in Leeds, and Sheffield. We also have more in common with working class people in Dublin, in Malmo, in Frankfurt, in Chicago, in Cape Town. We will always have that. And just as Debbie said, just as solidarity doesn't stop at Hadrian's Wall, it doesn't stop at the White Cliffs of Dover either. And in fact, by having an independent country, ironically, we can do more to demonstrate solidarity with working class communities throughout Britain and throughout Europe. Consider this, consider an independent Scotland being an active member of the European Union and pursuing policies to try and limit the actions of global companies and run interference with them so that they have to try and do something about the communities and the environment in which they operate. And imagine forcing through that in the European Parliament. And imagine that those policies would affect and make things better for ordinary working people in England, yes, even against the wishes of their own Tory government. That is how, by combining with other nations, we can achieve things not just in Scotland, but throughout the rest of the world. And the greatest thing I think about this debate is that it's reconnecting people with the politics with politics and with the concept of power. One of the terrible things about globalization and about the response of traditional political parties and the three national UK parties to this has been that people feel just so politically impotent. They feel that there are these massive global forces affecting their lives, and they have no ability to do anything about it whatsoever. And in the past, in periods of economic development, people would combine in trade unions and be able to do that. But now, because things are so atomized, very hard to do that. And people feel all at sea, which I think is one of the reasons why we have increasing depression in our communities, increasing suicides. People just can't connect with the world in which they're living with. But this Yes campaign is connecting people all over the country, in the communities, in the towns and cities of Scotland. People are getting together in events like this, and they're realizing that actually they can imagine a better future, and they can do something about it. And it's exciting. It really is exciting, because there's the prospect of change on the agenda. And when it's a yes or no vote in September, actually, that genie's out of the bottle. That's not going to go back in. That enthusiasm, that interest is there. And we, as people who are active in the Labour movement, need to capitalise on it and make sure that we can harness that energy to change Scotland. Because what happens on the 18th of September, very, very important, but only a step, only a beginning. Lots more to do after that. And of course, if we don't win the vote, lots to do in terms of monitoring these promises that have been made of jam tomorrow. Let's see if that really develops. And if it doesn't, I, for one, will be lining up to say, well, you asked us to vote on a false prospectus, and I want to vote again. So this process keeps going, and it's involving lots and lots of people. And finally, I'll say that it was Jim Sirrs who remarked this, that between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. on the 18th of September, between those 15 hours, sovereignty will lie with the people. The future of the people of Scotland will be in their own hands, and we will know very soon after 10 p.m. on that day whether they have decided to keep that power for themselves or whether they have decided to give it away. And it's our job in the next 2 months, I believe, to try and instill in people the self-belief and the confidence that they can do it. They can keep the power for themselves, and they can change the lives of themselves and their children for the better.